Fire Emblem Three Houses is a very popular and successful strategy RPG for the Switch that released almost exactly 3 years ago. Featuring multiple campaigns and plenty of side content, it's no surprise that it could take you well over 100 hours to see everything. Following up with the success of Three Houses and keeping in line with the warrior style of games, Fire Emblem Warriors Three Hopes is an alternate take on the story and gameplay of Three Houses. Koei Tecmo, the studio responsible for developing most of these warrior style games, already had a big hand in development of Three Houses, so Three Hopes seemed like it was an inevitability, really. I just finished a playthrough clocking in at about 70 hours, and considering that this game also has multiple campaigns like Three Houses, it only begs the question, is Fire Emblem Warriors Three Hopes worth your time? So let's start by explaining the narrative. Three Hopes is an alternate take on the story of Three Houses. It's not a sequel, not a prequel, not a side story. This is an alternate scenario. It starts at the beginning and shows character growth and development throughout, so even if you've never played Three Houses, you won't be lost if you start playing Three Hopes. If you're wondering if the story is canon, well, Three Houses already has like 4 different routes with separate stories. So you can imagine that this game just contains an extra 3 routes, and then each route is canon to itself. If you enjoy the story and characters of Three Houses, then this game just gives you more of that, including stuff we didn't get to see before. Perhaps the biggest change is that the protagonist role switches from Byleth to a character named Shez, I believe. Now, Byleth was a nothing character in Three Houses, but here they're actually given a much more interesting role, as well as voice acting. Seriously, silent protagonist Byleth is the most boring thing ever and was an incredibly stupid decision, since giving them a voice actor in Three Hopes gives them much more character. Support conversations are back and give a deeper look into the personalities and relationships between characters. Even some characters we barely got to know, or those we never got to see in Three Houses, actually make appearances here in Three Hopes, such as Hilda's brother Holst. The game does a good job of expanding on the world and characters within it, while also taking time to introduce new players to everything. My only issue is that there is a lot of talking. I mean a lot of talking. Characters talk on and on before battle, during battle, after battle, in between battles. People are always talking. And now support conversations are very nice, but I've always had my problems with them, even in Three Houses. No character development that happens in those conversations feels meaningful because they're optional and won't actually have an effect on the narrative. One of my main issues with Three Houses was that no matter which campaign you were on, the first half of the game would play out almost exactly the same until you got to the later half when the time skip happened. In Three Hopes, the time skip happens much sooner. It's also only a 2-year time skip, but that hardly matters. I've only finished Scarlet Blaze, but I gotta say, I enjoyed Edelgard's story in Three Hopes much more than her story in Three Houses. In Three Houses, her story felt like it was straight up unfinished or rushed towards the end, and I hated it. But here I think they've done a much better job. So whether you're a fan of Three Houses or have never played it, this game will have something in its story for you to enjoy. Just be prepared for lots and lots of talking. I can't compare all the different routes since I haven't finished them all, but at the very least I can say that the Scarlet Blaze route in Three Hopes was tremendously better than Crimson Flower was in Three Houses. I wouldn't be surprised if the other routes feel a little more refined here as well. Overall, Fire Emblem Three Houses had a little bit of writing issues with the second half of its story, and I've never been a huge fan of the split narrative between all these different routes, but at least everything seems to make a little more sense in Three Hopes. Now this is a warrior style game, so the gameplay isn't quite like Three Houses. It's that typical 1 versus 1,000 where your attacks cleave through armies and you have to take over outposts throughout a map. Most enemies are just cannon fodder, but the officers will actually give you some trouble. You can use special moves which will deplete a weapon's durability, and some classes will have weapon advantages over others. Enemy officers also have a stun gauge, and if you can deplete said gauge, you will stun them, allowing you to perform a special attack. During battle, many different things can happen, and you might have to take care of several objectives at once. This is where the strategy spirit of Fire Emblem games kinda lives on, as you can look at the map screen and give your units different orders. Assign someone like Caspar to take over an outpost, or have Linhardt heal an allied officer under attack. You might be bombarded with many objectives, and your best bet to control the battlefield would be to split your units up. You can bring 4 units with you, and you can switch between them at any time during battle, but for the big battles you can actually bring an additional 4. You just can't assume direct control of those additional 4 units. Shez can also instant transmission themselves to any allied base, making them pretty pivotal to combat. Despite the different approach to combat, many other elements from Three Houses return here. In between battles, you're at camp, and here you can do various things such as train your units to master different classes and unlock higher tier classes, cook meals to raise your support with units and give buffs to everyone, or do chores for more support points. You can even give gifts or invite someone out on an expedition, which is like having tea in Three Houses. You've got a blacksmith and other areas to upgrade the gear and abilities of everyone in the army, as well as a place to replay previous battles in case you want to get that S rank reward. Speaking of battles, each chapter sets up the battlefield into different zones. You have to do mini battles to take over zones and reach the main battle. You don't have to do all the mini battles, but you can get some extra rewards for each area you take over. During a big battle, you can utilize strategies depending on whatever resources you've acquired in the areas you did conquer. These strategies let you recruit enemies into your army or open up shortcuts on the map, and can really help turn the tide of battle. The only problem with it all is just how repetitive it can feel after a while. Sure, unlocking new classes or getting better weapons helps keep things fresh for a little bit, but after that, you'll just be going through the same types of battles and fighting the same enemies. The only interesting enemies are the monsters you occasionally encounter, which are huge and use attacks that have massive range. They're weak to certain weapon types and elements, but the problem is if you didn't bring, say, a lance user with you and the monster is weak to lances, and you're pretty much out of luck since there's no way to switch out mid-combat. There's a sort of perfect dodge and block mechanic, which doesn't feel super useful, and each class plays somewhat differently, but by the end it all just kind of feels the same. There's post-game secret characters and weapons to obtain, as well as New Game Plus, so you can carry over your levels and equipment into a new campaign. You even unlock maddening difficulty to make up for your higher levels, but other than the new story, gameplay doesn't change that much, except for maybe having new characters to use. Now, Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes isn't the only Warriors-style game available on the Switch. Heck, it isn't even the only Fire Emblem Warriors game on Switch. So you're probably thinking to yourself, why should I get 3 Hopes and not any other Warriors game? Well, I'm going to compare it to a few other Warriors games and help you answer that question. Namely, we're going to talk about Age of Calamity, Persona 5 Strikers, and the OG Fire Emblem Warriors. But not the OG Hyrule Warriors, since I only played that on Wii U, and I've heard they've changed a lot of stuff since then, added a lot of DLC and whatnot, so yeah, we'll exclude that one for now. Comparing 3 Hopes to the OG Fire Emblem Warriors, I'd say that 3 Hopes is definitely better. It has a better narrative, and it's more feature complete. The original Fire Emblem Warriors has a lot of clone characters, and its story is really just made for Fire Emblem fans. Like how Chrom and Lynn's support conversation is a reference to Lynn and Hector's support in her Fire Emblem game. I like the user interface here a little better, it just looks kinda cleaner, but 3 Hopes is just a better game overall and would appeal to a more general audience. Both Age of Calamity and Strikers have much more interesting combat than 3 Hopes though. I played all these games on the hardest difficulties I could, and while I didn't find much challenge in some of the other games, Age of Calamity was actually very hard. You really have to watch out when fighting tough enemies, and time those dodges to get a flurry rush or whatever it's called. I mean, eventually combat will devolve into using the combo that forces out an enemy stun gauge, and then using stasis on them, but each character feels very unique to play as, and enemy types are also well varied. You can still order units to attack outposts in Age of Calamity, and switch between them mid-combat, but it doesn't really have all those home base features that 3 Hopes does. The narrative is also a little weird. It was almost supposed to be kind of like the Halo Reach of the Zelda series, but then they do some like time travel shenanigans, and it's not exactly something everyone was fond of. There is a lot less talking though, and the action is more fun, so that might be more your thing. Persona 5 Strikers is actually my favorite among these games because it introduces many unique ideas to a warrior style game, but it has an entirely different problem. You need to play Persona 5 first, or maybe at the very least watch the anime. Strikers is a direct sequel to Persona 5, and the story picks up a few months after the end of that game. All the characters get back together and reminisce about their previous adventure before embarking on an entirely new one. If you just jumped into Strikers without playing Persona 5, you'll just be sitting there like, what the hell's a Ryuji and why does the cat talk? Other than that, you can still fuse new personas and explore areas while sneaking around and ambushing enemies. Enemies still have their weaknesses, and you pause combat to select your special moves, so they still keep the spirit of Persona 5's turn-based combat while throwing in some of that warrior-style action. You're not running around a battlefield taking over outposts though, and that's part of why I actually love how Strikers works. levels just feel a lot more interesting and the game doesn't feel nearly as repetitive as the other warrior style games. Overall, I guess I'd say that for most people looking for an interesting story and gameplay experience, then Persona 5 Strikers is your best bet, but only if you're familiar with the story of Persona 5. Age of Calamity is also pretty decent, maybe a little better for those who just want in on the action, whereas Three Hopes is a decently fun game with an interesting narrative that's well suited to fans of Three Houses as well as newcomers. The story, with all the world building and character development, is a big focus, so if that's not the experience you're looking for, then maybe look elsewhere, since like I said, lots of talking.
Look, you've got food all over your face. Hold still and I'll wipe it clean.
Please stop. I'm an adult. I can do it myself.
If you want to play through all the different stories in the game, they give you items in New Game Plus to skip past the minor battles and speed up the overall process, so even if playthrough number 1 took you 70 hours like mine, playthrough number 2 may take half that or less. And personally, I'm pretty satisfied with my one playthrough so far. I've dipped into a second one as the time of this writing, but honestly I'm pretty burned out from the game by now. Which is pretty much what happened with me in Three Houses when I finished a playthrough and I put that game down for a while. There's always gonna be more here for me to come back to if I like, but in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate you and everything you do. Ciao.